Maxime, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Good to have you here again. How was the last month?
Last month has been eventful and um did what we had to do and happy to be on the other side of it.
Can imagine. So, we're going to start with our first question today and wanted to start with Sang Bleu magazine and tattooism and the experience around that. What was your initial vision when you created Sang Bleu magazine and later tattooism?
Yeah, great question. I think there was I think things really for Sang Bleu magazine things crystallized when I moved to London in I believe 2006, just shortly after I graduated from art college. I had been into tattooing for fascinated by it since but my earliest memories are literally being a kid and very young kid, and one of my aunts had a boyfriend who had some homemade tattoos done on him, like he did on himself, or maybe prison tattoos like weed leaf or some things like that. And I just thought it was awesome, and it was really cool. I have some other pretty vivid memories of a guy showing up in my village who was one of those, like, in French we call them like one of those like hobo hippie punk rock guy, um who would just show up once or twice a year, and his name was George, and I must have been like 11, 12, maybe, just a little local skateboarder, and that guy would just show up and I don't know, had all kinds of stories. He must have been in his mid-20s. He seemed super old to us. And yeah, like he sat us down once and was like, "Oh, if you ever want to tattoo yourself," he proceeded to explain, how to put like some thread or some around the needle to hold the ink, and how to do that, and then how to be careful to hide it from your parents. And and that was just seemed really fun and intriguing, a bit scary, but like I didn't particularly like the idea of poking myself, but I was like, it's also cool. Like the whole thing that comes with it is really compelling. And then a little older, there was a guy at the local swimming pool, one of the what do you call that? The people who just check the people bathing,
The
like
Baywatchers.
lifeguards. Yeah, so one of the lifeguards had a half naked mermaid, I think, tattooed in a kind of like 80s style color. Probably a decently made tattoo. It didn't look rough, but and it was really like to very, very young pubescent like myself. It seemed like incredibly, enticing and erotic and intriguing. And so anyway, and I think it's just like there was this sort of like, and then I was listening to some music as well, where the singers would talk about tattoos. It was part of something that I thought was interesting, that brought together a certain gravitas, but a certain very almost childish, near childish enjoyment. There was a something very, yeah, just so well primitive or extremely, what's the word I'm looking for, like I'm missing a word here, but primal, that's the word. There's something very primal and enjoyable and about it that I thought sounded incredibly right and equally, and that's where I'm getting to the Semble magazine. I could feel equally the more I was intrigued by things like this, well, and tattooing in particular, the more I could feel as well the pushback and all of the prejudice, all of the social conventions and yeah, prejudice against something like this without truly understanding why. I could make sense of it. I mean, I could understand why people were not supposed to I don't know, like kill each other, whatever, like steal, like more like morals like this, but don't tattoo yourself or don't draw on yourself, draw on stuff. I didn't It didn't make any sense to me. And I like things to make sense. So I think that's really where this tension between the two, between how attractive it seemed on the one hand, and how it the more I understood and I was intrigued by tattooing and things like this, same with graffiti, same with things like this, the more I could feel all the social control and prejudice against such free expression of individuals, of what self. It's an expression of self, really, and the urge for society to control the expression of people. So there was that really to begin with, and then as I grew older and started getting more into tattooing and started, I was doing graffiti. I was in a very sort of hip hop kind of thing myself, and I started getting interested in tattooing, but especially in Europe, tattooing was a completely gate kept around much more of a rock and roll, biker, like punk rock kind of thing that did not really culturally mesh or connect with the culture I was interested in, and often itself had even prejudice and often a lot of rejection of hip hop and other and these kind of, yeah, like this, I'm going to say this kind of culture, because really what I started understanding is what was there was underlying racism, sexism going on in the pre-existing tattooing, or homophobia, like all kind of pretty ugly underlying, well, values or agenda behind the gatekeeping going on in European, a very sort of small community, very coherent community of European tattooing in the 90s and 90s and early 2000s. What I experienced myself, I can't speak for earlier, but I feel that, and I just want to quickly note that from my understanding, even though there was such things going on in America, of course, but America's so big that there seemed to have always been enough space, like literally physical space and people to allow quite a few different, allow different communities, different practices to coexist, to just exist there, whether we saw them or not. I mean, obviously, certain things didn't make it to the tattoo magazines in Europe, but nonetheless, they still existed in cholo tattooing and things like this existed in the US and have existed for a long time, especially in the Southwest. Those things have existed since the 80s and 90s, and it's not because they weren't in the magazines that they didn't exist. Whereas in Europe, those things didn't quite exist. So I could see that as well. And as the more I was getting involved in arts and interested in tattooing, the more I could see that the offering of what tattooing, the tattoo world, the tattoo industry could offer the people with my kind of background, my kind of interest, uh, well, it was non-existent, and at best, it was sort of politely dismissing, and at worst, it was actually hostile to people coming to tattooing from a different angle. So I could observe that. And what was really interesting is that as long as I was just in Switzerland and in Europe by myself, pretty much, I felt completely isolated. And I was like, well, maybe it's just me. There's not really necessarily a demand, or like the there isn't really this sort of like critical like point where there's enough people who want to change, want a different approach to tattooing, that people will have to adapt to one way or another. But then I moved to London and I could see not only that there was an incredible amount of people who had interest for tattooing, that had not much to do um with old school or traditional or like biker type stuff, and the other way, and equally there was a budding scene of people who did tattoo with a different approach, and where there was already more open-mindedness around the practice of tattooing from the point of view of the tattooists, and especially places like Into You Tattoo, the tattoo studio, Alex Bini's tattoo studio in London, for me really represented that, and represented a new kind of approach to tattooing. And then I started seeing individuals like Thomas Hooper, like Duncan X, like Frank Carter, or Javi Rodriguez, or what's his name, John Dick. People who came, all the people from Jolie Rouge, Montana Blue. Anyway, like there was a much more diversity in the people who did tattoos and the people who got tattoos, the way the tattoos looked. There was this wider range, and I was like, okay, I see that. At that point, I didn't really have any active involvement in tattooing. I just came out of art college. I did graphic design and editorial design, but I knew how to do magazines. That was like media in particular was a thing that I had always loved. Like since I was a kid, my first tattoo magazine, my first skateboard magazines that I would, get by any means necessary, and then graffiti zines, things that pre-internet were the only way to communicate and to share the culture in subcultures. And so I knew the power of those. I had seen the tattoo magazines, but they didn't look so great, or at least they clearly weren't made for me and people like me, and really only spoke to this kind of rigid, pre-existing sort of community that I was like, great, it exists, fine. I'm fine with it existing, but it's not representative of the wider context and culture today. And I just felt it made sense to create something that would put that in perspective, put tattooing in particular in perspective with other artistic and cultural practices like fashion, of contemporary art, writing, philosophy, dance, kink, all of those different things that to me were adjacent to tattooing. And that tattooing, like I could see the people who were getting tattooed and where they came from, not geographically, but mentally, intellectually, culturally, like how were they getting to tattooing, with what kind of intentions and what kind of needs. And clearly all of those other cultural practices, artistic practices made sense. And tattooing, a new culture of tattooing could only be understood or created by directly addressing and starting a dialogue, starting some sort of like back and forth and form of flux between those adjacent surrounding cultures and tattooing itself. And then, so that's really how Sang Bleu magazine started. It was a form of manifesto. It was partly a manifesto for myself as well. It was definitely, it had something quite idiosyncratic in some ways because it was very much about my own interests as well. But then I had also gotten to a point in my, that was what, my mid 20s, when I felt quite confident that those interests I had were representative of other people as well. So that's kind of how it began, and then people started connecting with it so quickly that it became a sort of collective effort quite quickly as well. And clearly, from tattoo artists to clients or people interested in tattooing, tattoo enthusiasts, like that very quickly just clicked like that. And interestingly, that's also partly what happened with tattooism. I'll get to that. But yeah, so like, it was, and I knew like as soon as I got into it, or I started being interested in it and decided to actually do it, I knew, I knew it would rub some people the wrong way. Like some people wouldn't understand or might not like it. I didn't mind because I came from graffiti, where like, it's very competitive. It's very like in your face, and people don't like it. Skateboarding is the same thing. So I didn't mind. I just wanted to ensure that certain key people that I personally thought were representative of who I would be doing this for, both from the audience side, but like the enthusiast side, but also the industry side would support me. And I remember sitting asking Alex Binney, who I thought definitely was one of those people, to see if I could pitch that to him and see what he thought about it. And I had been sort of hanging out around tattoo studios for quite a while in London. And so I sort of had been hanging out a bit, I guess, at NTU the way it used to be. Tattoo enthusiasts would just go hang out at tattoo studios. That was how the community existed, or tattoo conventions still were kind of that one go-to experience. And I asked Alex to talk to him, so he told me to come one day at the end of a day. I think he was just at that time I believe he lived outside of London already. He might have lived in Brighton area already, and was just like going there uh, to the London location only a few times a week. And then he got there. End of the day, I had been waiting for him like already, and he just got in very loud, very this sort of charismatic, performative character that he is. And like, oh, hey, I'm here, like, just take your time. I'm here to talk. Do you remember, like, I asked you to sit down and pitch that thing to you? And he was like, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then, he proceeded to drinking a lot of white wine with the other artists, as it used to be. It took another hour at least, maybe two, of me sitting on that sofa. I think it was red. There was this sort of little corridor between the lobby and the back room where people were tattooing, and that corridor where there would be the uh, stencil machines and stuff, and there was a sofa there where you could just hang out and wait while and I just sat there for another hour or two until he actually came to sit down. I was like, so what's up? What do you want to talk about? And I was like, okay, that's. And I just I just took a deep breath and try to convey what I was trying to do, and without stuttering too much, and trying to make sense. And he heard me out for probably 10-15 minutes, and said, if you actually do this, I'll support it. And that was it. And that's all I needed, really. That was for me, that was the green light I needed. That was, if he told me no, fuck off with that hipster thing or whatever, like I might have still done it because I'm a bit stubborn like that. But that would have been hard. But he just said, hey, that's cool. Just do it. Just do it, and I'll be supporting that. And I was like, okay, now. And I just left, and then the next day I started setting up interviews, sending up the first issue. So I think, so yeah, that's all I needed. And that's just generally in life. I've always proceeded. I just need a few people to understand. I don't need the rest. I don't need, like, it's not a democratic decision. It's just like, just need the support from the right people. But yeah, so that was really Sang Bleu. And then quickly connected, started posting on MySpace at the time, and immediately even people from the US, people I had never been to the US at that point. Well, not as an adult. And people immediately, like, I just put two paragraphs, like, explaining what the idea of it was. And people started writing and started saying, like, hey, I'd love to write for you. I would like to shoot for the project. One thing that's interesting as well is there had been a change in magazine publishing at the time. I don't want to get too deep into that, but it might speak to some people who I had been inspired as well by the work of a few people, especially a Dutch magazine director and publisher called Job van Bennekom, who had been doing a magazine called Magazine, and then started a magazine called Fantastic Man, also the publisher of But magazine. And there had been a progressive change in magazine publishing that 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 were less focused on a very structured, specific subject progressively, and had been pivoting to a more of an attitude. It's a shitty or identities, and it's a bit abstract, and it could be a long conversation. I don't want to get into it, but there had been a switch in the approach of magazine publishing, and that also had inspired me for the editorial approach of Sang Bleu magazine, because it was not a thematic magazine. It was not like, oh, we talk about tattooing, we talk about this, that. It wasn't about that. It was about who are the people who are interested in all of those different elements. What is the attitude that a person can have that will make all of those different components coherent and that would make such a magazine representative of that attitude. So that's for me important, just a little element of context, because that became the norm. That's really what social media became a sort of norm for. But it's someone who hasn't experienced, who was too young or not even born pre-social media, like might struggle to understand like the shift that had happened in the approach of publishing and cultural publishing at the time in the early 2000s. So that was very important as well, to solidify or to give a base, a bit of a template that I worked from to create Sang Bleu magazine. And then sort of fast forward to Tattooism magazine around 2014, it was a little bit of the same thing. And it's interesting to see everything that came after Sang Bleu magazine, all the different tattoo magazines and tattoo media that emerged afterwards that resembles resembled Sang Bleu very much, like in a lot of different ways. And whether Sang Bleu started it and created the template, maybe it did, maybe it didn't. Maybe it was just in the air, in the zeitgeist, and then it was a matter of like being the first people to catch it. I'm not saying I created, like, I don't think anything can blow up like that if it's too unique. Like, it needs to be in the zeitgeist. So I'm not trying to credit myself for originating the rest, and maybe only being a bit earlier than others. But what is interesting is that quickly in the late 2000s, early 10s, Tumblr became a thing. And then there was a form of publishing on Tumblr, very image based, very sort of mood based, that really switched something in the way people approached these kinds of things. And the editorial approach that I had in Sang Bleu magazine, that was completely novel at the time, became the norm via Tumblr. And became really like the way anyone did. And then quickly, so Tumblr must have been late 2000s, and then Instagram emerged around 2011, maybe. Yeah, 11, 10, 11. And then pushed that even further. But what is interesting is that still, like, um, Instagram brought the community, even though Tumblr could be called a social media, but it was less social in the sense that it wasn't a lot of message. And, it was like, but Instagram really became much more community sort of orientated. And really for me, it brought even a completely new approach to tattooing, and made tattooing before that, even though we had opened up the perspective of what tattooing can be and what it can do for people. It was still a pretty structured thing where the people who did tattoos were this kind of caste, this kind of, almost cult, like whatever, this sect. And then you were, and among those, like, there were all kinds of much more diverse type of thing, type of approach. And then a much more diverse approach from the enthusiast, the client side as well, but it was still very structured. Instagram quite quickly opened up, made the practice of tattooing look and be much more democratized in a lot of ways, and in ways we can feel conflicted about sometimes, possibly, but also for to a large extent in extremely positive ways. And progressively, it started being very tangible. Um, in social media, on Instagram in particular. And so what happened with Tattooism is that I started the Tattooism page, Instagram page, and that grew extremely quickly and became like very quickly, yeah, very big and influential, as opposed to a lot of other pages that were appearing on Instagram at the time that essentially just gathered photos without much coherence or without much intelligence, really, or like understanding of what tattooing is and why would you put this image and that image, often done by people who are not really in the tattoo world and didn't really like, or if they are, who just weren't putting much thought into it, just put things together because they looked good, like the mood kind of approach. I think I really try to add a true editorial and knowledgeable approach to the way I was doing tattooism, the Instagram page, even though in itself it was still one of those Instagram pages, but I really put extra effort in it. And at some point I just got to the idea like that at that point I would say there was about a decade of decline of print media, and a lot of tattoo related print media had just disappeared or had gone so bad for the sake of survival, really, that that were just not even worth mentioning. And I just felt that it would feel good to or that at least for the sake of, I could see how interesting online social media based editorial projects were, but I could also see how or the pitfalls of those and how quickly things were forgotten and how hard it was to distill all the posting into more in depth, into more articulated information. And I constituted Tattooism magazine as a print and a publishing project as really a multifaceted, as the different arms of one single editorial approach, where the Instagram would be one thing and the print would work directly with the Instagram, and certain things that became themes that became more structured, um, uh, that appeared online would progressively be taken, separated, and made into a more lasting format that is print. Yeah, so that was the goal. The goal with the printer or the print counterpart for Tattooism was to have all these different expressions of one editorial project, because you can even think all of those different forms that at this editorial work takes in relation to how long they last, how long it takes to put them together, and then how long they continue to exist. Like you can have a tweet or whatever, you could have things that would last for a couple of hours. You could have some things or like a story, and then a post on an actual timeline on the main page might last a few days or a week. If it's doing really well, it might still be going around. And then if you posted several images around one theme, you could have a theme going on for a few weeks, but beyond that you had to switch to something else. And the paper was the next level that would take a few months to put together, but then would take a few weeks to distribute, and then a few months for people to get the object, read it, think about it, share it. So it's all a matter of like, it's all a question of the temporality of how fast, the pace, the speed at which information is uh, aggregated, is formalized, and then absorbed, and also how long it will last in terms of its influence, in terms of the way it changes the way people think. So I just really got to the point where after like the things had been sort of tipped over, where in the 2000s, progressively social media became just this extension of a web page that would be a window for an editorial print project, to the point where social media had become the main place for publishing. And then the print became the window in some ways, or became this sort of more like timeless, more steady form. So it's almost 180 degrees on that. And I just felt in 2014 when I started the Tattooism project that it was the right time to do that. And then, yeah, it lasted for a little while. None of those ever were made to make money. So, uh, so yeah, they just lasted as long as I had it in me to do it. And then I had to let go. But I always so felt that it was important. And I think it does speak to another subject that we can talk about today, which is sort of branching out and how as tattoo artists we might do a spectrum, like a few different things that all participate in what we do and that all matter. Even if each one doesn't make money per se, it doesn't mean that it doesn't it's not relevant to a professional practice of tattooing. Well, professional if we talk about the financial aspects, cultural, of course. So I think really for me, all of those projects in my life, and there's going to be more, but have in common to be part of just the way I approach. For me, I'm not able to just do tattoos without doing all of those. They are all part of the same thing, and it's not because again, one might be profitable, one might seem to cost money, but it doesn't matter. Like I even approached opening tattoo studios like that to a large extent. I never really made money with any of my tattoo studios, but they were all absolutely crucial to my personal evolution as a professional myself, but also they were my way to give something to the tattoo community, to the history of tattooing in that sense. So yeah, that's for the magazines.
Did you foresee the level of impact when you started all this?
No, it's hard to say, and you know, it's still a very abstract notion to me. You know, it's humbling and exciting when people say how we're inspired sometimes, but I still probably don't know, and I'm probably still not sure for myself. That said, but it's probably better like that as well. You know, it's I think that I really believe in, you know, in staying humble and staying just like I need to keep myself sort of at arm's length of such an awareness. But but I would say nonetheless, like I do need that moment when I feel things click, things just work, like things because I've done a ton of other stuff that never clicked. Do you know what I mean? And for the most part, I probably saw those coming. Once or twice, I did things that definitely hoped would click, and they didn't really. But I would say I have experienced enough times when I saw things did click that I know there's something there, and that on whatever scale it will have it might have an impact simply because of what I was saying, not necessarily that I mean it catches something that is in the air in the zeitgeist. And so I definitely felt that with the magazine, like early on, that's kind of those moments I was talking about earlier. And that's what I felt the first time did a watch, you know, with Hublot, like in the collab. That's the way I felt when we started doing fonts with Swiss typefaces. I feel like definitely when we opened Sang Bleu, like Sang Bleu London, the tattoo studio, like it was a thing that just made sense. It all made sense. It's really about that moment. You're like, yeah, everything makes sense. And I feel that the other way around, when I sort of failed, like things that didn't quite stick, that didn't quite click, I can definitely tell for all of those projects that I knew there were some, you know, blind spots or things where I was like, you know, this and sure enough, that didn't sort of go through like this or sort of materialize. So I think so yeah, like it's I don't want to say like I expected things like this to have a an impact, but it's nice to hear that it did.
You can be proud of yourself. I mean, it's really impressive. Like nowadays, it's one of the biggest in the actual game. So congrats on that. Let's talk about collaborations now. You've worked with some of the biggest brands and artists. How do you decide which collaboration align with your artistic and business values?
So I think it's a very important question, really, in how in the fact that a lot of tattoo artists will face or will have opportunities, and I took a lot of hits as well, so that others don't. I feel, and I'm happy to share what I can. Think that I think that especially from the moment, like from things went so well, things felt so right for me, that one extremely positive thing that it did for me is that, but also I was in my late 20s, early 30s. I wasn't that young. So like I needed things to work out. I needed to pay my bills. I needed to really like not fuck around. So really it helped me because I didn't want people to waste my time. I wanted to only focus on things that made sense. The question is, how do you define what makes sense? I think with collabs, there's a healthy balance of like sending the message out there that you're available. Um, because generally like people want to gravitate to people who that they have a good chance to be able to work with, or that they don't want to be told no 50 times before they find someone who says yes. So, like, either way, make yourself visible, put the message out there that you are available for such things, but also that you cannot be taken advantage of. And that's what's very important, because the less experienced you are, the more people will by default expect to be able to take advantage of you. And what is very, very tricky for tattoo artists in particular, but all artists, I feel, or people in arts, is that you will have in front of you a person who approaches you, who works for this brand or that brand. But this person i- is not a person. This person represents a brand, represents a corporation. And all of those corporations are structured, all the processes, all the intentions are structured around exploiting other people's skills, other people's qualities, and taking advantage of them for the most part. So you will have a person who will make you feel that you're talking to a person, and it's that a person to person thing, and that this person will sound very reasonable, or will be just, just like you, might be young, might be enthusiastic. But this person doesn't speak, you don't do it for them, and they don't do it for themselves either, even if they might feel that they do, but they don't. They're doing it for corporation. And as long as they implement the corporation's strategies, those strategies will be based on taking advantage of people. And so getting more than they give. So you need yourself to have a very, very clear sense of a threshold. Like, what do you need to get at least to say yes for what you give? And that's something that is very tricky, because there's one thing that is an overarching issue in the tattoo industry, which is a sense of worth. I'll try my best to be succinct. But in other cultural, artistic professions, industries, music, contemporary art, cinema, the legal system that you're part of is structured around the idea of intellectual property. So if you're a musician, I'm going to take an example of extremely successful musicians because that makes it very clear. But it applies to most musicians, professional musicians, not just like people who do that, um, but like professional musicians. Taylor Swift, or 50 Cent or whatever. Maybe from the age of 20 to 40 years old, you'll be producing music, you'll be creating new music. And from the age of 40 until you die, and probably your kids die as well, if you're extremely successful, the music you have created will generate money. What allows that money, that music to keep generating money, is the legal system that allows it, which is the laws around intellectual property. And then because those laws exist, then you have an actual industry, like the music industry, labels who have hundreds, thousands maybe of people who, salespeople, um, who create contracts, who go out to sell what is often called a catalog, which is really, the melodies you've created, the lyrics you've created, blah, blah, blah. And who will go out and say, "Hey, do you want to use this, you know, 50 cents, hey, shorty, it's your birthday. And for your McDonald's advert, it costs, $20 million. Do you want it? Yes, no. Oh, yeah, you do? Okay, cool. Then that's $20 million. And then out of that, once all the lawyers have been paid, well, 50 Cent gets some money out of it. Same thing like every time uh Jump Around from a House of Pain is being played at a bar or a sports event. Well, the members of House of Pain still get money from it, and they still get a lot of money from it every year. That happens to some level in some shape or form in most art industries. It doesn't happen in the tattoo industry. And that's a problem. That's a problem in a lot of ways. And one of the reasons is that people just aren't aware. Tattoo artists don't understand the value of what they do in a literal sense, like the monetary value. There's because there isn't any industry around to generate money out of all those drawings, all that art that a person creates. That's a different story. But coming back to the question of the collaboration, people who approach you for collab, they're not a tattoo client. What you will do for them is intellectual property. They understand the value of it, but most tattoo artists have no clue what they're doing for this entity. So you are, by definition, for most people, in a very uneven relationship to begin with. And I was lucky to study that at school and to be aware of that through type design, for example, because that is how type design works. You create fonts and then you sell the fonts. What it is, it's licensing of intellectual property. So I knew a lot about that. And not that it's as is, it could not be literally, oh, sometimes it can, but it's not like you can license the same design over and over again as a tattoo artist. But at least to have an understanding of what will, once you've created anything for a corporation, what will this person or this entity do with what you create? How are they going to generate money directly or indirectly? Often it will be indirectly because it will be marketing, or it's rarely something that will directly bring them money, but indirectly, but it's part of what they do. It's part of the whole like strategy they have. And therefore, indirectly, it does bring them revenue. So it is very crucial to educate yourself as a tattoo artist around such notions if you want to be able to figure this out, because you might not be getting money, but will you be getting something else? Will you be getting exposure? Will you be getting, maybe you will. That's the first question, and maybe it's valid enough for you, but will you be able to do with the exposure you might get from such or such collaboration? Will you be able to indirectly turn it into something that empowers you and your business in particular? Because it's rarely about, your artistic value, but will that truly empower your business or not? And whether it does or not is often up to you. It's no one's going to do it for you. So it's really up to yourself to understand the ways getting a collab out to whatever can trickle down to real life work or exposure or any sort of value for you. And it's pretty complex. And the problem for tattooists is that we very much alone figuring these things out. There's very little discussion and very little support for such things. There's no agents. There's no, I mean, and well, there's a few, but they're all frauds. So anyway, but coming back to my experiences, I had that, and I had a certain sense that I didn't want to waste time. I wanted to do something, and I knew how beautiful it is when things do click, when you do something that's truly not a one-off, hey, I just took advantage of this artist, da da da, but something where you bring something to the other party that they would have never expected, and they do that for you as well. And since I had experienced that in other contexts, be it even Sang Bleu magazine, as we were just talking about, I knew how it felt and I knew how good it can be. And I knew I didn't really settle for less than that unless it was absolutely very tangibly monetary and I would be getting, something super boring or super pointless, but I would be getting a lot of money out of it. Sure. it almost never happened. But I know how good it can get when things do click. And I was like, well, that's what I'm here for. So that's really the mindset to begin any sort of discussion on. But one thing that I realized as well, and that changed in my sort of professional lifetime, is that it was such a very rare occurrence when that started happening to me. Whereas today it's extremely common and it has become like, yeah, like something extremely common. So it's important for me that the tattoo industry educates itself on how things like this, and I referred to this a little earlier in the conversation as well, how things like this belong to a range of activities that tattoo artists do that all partake, that feed or yeah participate at the end of the day to the professional and artistic activity that a tattoo artist has, because obviously there's the monetary, the professional business side of things, but then there's the artistic side as well, the cultural side of things, where now I'm loving seeing such an increase of tattoo artists creating art, true art. Sometimes they've fully transitioned to doing art. I just bought a piece from a painter called Julien Jacquat, who, who came, yeah, who came from tattooing, and we've had a lot of like really cool back and forth. And I just bought a painting. I really try to buy from tattoo artists. There's a Will Sheldon, obviously, like some of the first people who that I knew who really truly did that were Stephanie Tamez and Tamara Santibanez, who really went all in. And uh, what's her name? Green Ghana, Silicon Done on Instagram, who's doing amazing work, and then everything adjacent. And I'm loving to see this really become a thing, because that's what I was hoping, what I was trying to do with Sang Bleu magazine. I was just trying to show an amazing painting, an amazing sculpture, um, or still from a movie, or like a shot of a dancer next to a tattoo, or like to you know so it's becoming real and it's beautiful, but the next step is to be more structured around it, in my opinion. And so when it comes to collaborations, obviously in the beginning you will have to try things to see what works out for you. But what is very, very, very important, in my opinion, is you need at least to ensure that you get some help with anything contractual to make sure that you know what you're signing up for, and that you don't agree to terms or to commitments that can become a burden if things take a weird turn. That's one thing. And then have a sense beforehand of what you expect to get out of it, and where do you need to jump ship and be like, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to do it, or I'm not going to be able to continue doing something if it starts taking a certain turn. So at first, at least have those absolute sort of boundaries for yourself and stick to them, even if it feels weird, even if the other entity might try to make you, feel guilty, or what's the word? Yeah, like guilt trip you about blah blah. It doesn't matter. Like especially when you're talking corporate people, they don't care. Uh, so uh, so be very careful about your own survival and your own safety on every level, and then try different things, and try small, try big when take risk in the beginning, and then have that sort of limit, this sort of threshold, this sort of boundary. But beyond that, take risk, experiment until you find certain things that truly click, and then you raise the bar, and then progressively you say, okay, now I don't want now I'm not going to go for something simply because it's not terrible, because it doesn't cross those boundaries, but then I'm going to go for those things that click. Do you know what I mean? It's a different sort of perspective. The, and yeah, like after you've done a few test runs, or you just switch to just the things that you click with. And it's kind of the same with tattooing in general. In the beginning, you'll just try different things, and there's some things you might not mind doing that you might not be terrible at, but that don't really float your boat like that. That might, you know, and then all of a sudden you like click with some things, like, and then you're like, okay, let me do more of those things. So that's really the strategy for me.
For those who do not necessarily understand or like know what kind, or like what are the key signs that a deal is exploitative rather than mutually beneficial?
That's it's tricky because it can come in so many different forms. Like, I think it's about really knowing oneself. I think it can be, obviously, it's always possible to use money as a proxy because money is a form of signifier for something else, that something else works. And especially in a corporate setting, money is the only relevant signifier, not for yourself, but for them. So that's something that's very important. And I would definitely say each tattooist might, do some tattoos for free or might do things because we love it. Money is not the end all be all to tattooists, but to a brand, to a corporation, it is. And that's the first thing that is crucial to remember. If they're not paying you correctly, if the money's not right, that means they literally don't value. Like, don't let this person you have in front of you saying, no, no, but it's so cool, you're going to get this or that. If they value your work and whatever they get from you, it will be expressed in money, period, because that's the only language they understand. And that truly works in in corporations. So I would say at the end of the day, you can start with that. I mean, a person can always start with that. That said, there might be some things you might be able to get out of a collaboration that they might not see, but that you do see. So, for example, like something that is obvious to a brand, like say, you know, a big fashion brand has like advertising is a necessity for them. It's something that they have to do that is almost that they wish they could do without. They have to do it anyway. What is a burden to them can be something extremely beneficial for you. So, when you think of the amount of visibility that any large advertising campaign gets, and think of the amount of crap that we see every day, like things that we rather not see. Well, if each advert was an amazing piece of art, I mean, amazing, like think of how amazing the if the world would be. So if your art that you create because you want it to be seen and you want it to be shared with the world, like is shown in an advertising campaign, in itself, it is already part of what you work for. It is a form of it is a but to the company, to the brand that you work with, it might seem like a burden. They might not see it that way necessarily, but to you, very well might be that. So I'd be just a little careful with narcissism, and feeling that having your own narcissism or ego stroke. What's the word? Stroked. Anyway, be mindful of that. It's good, we need it every now and then, a bit of reassurance and the ego sort of bumping, but but yeah, but in itself, it very well can be a reward beyond just a purely narcissistic thing, and it's perfectly valid. Why not? Like, you wonder what your art looks like on huge billboards, you get that opportunity. Great. Like that can very be valid even if there's no like remuneration. What I'm trying to say there is that the in-kind remuneration you might get from a collaboration can take all kinds of forms. But that's for you to decide, and you need to be quite precise and quite analytic about yourself, quite introspective to ensure that the company that approaches you cannot take advantage of your own need for ego, like, and things like this, because that's not gonna last very long. And the line is very thin in arts between what is ego driven, what is ego the feeding, and what is true. What do we put out and what do we receive beyond? Because we for the most part, we don't do this for the money. We do it we as long as we get that exchange. So what is a very one-way thing for most people is a two-way thing for artists. Like the use of the drive of ego is integral to what we do. It is part of what we do. But as opposed to a lot of other people for whom it's only something that is a sort of one way going to them, it is the way for us, it's a two-way thing. We get the ego feeding and we give back in relation to that. So I feel that there's a need for an awareness of how those two things play for each person, and then ensuring that if it is part of the remuneration you're considering and not just the financial counterpart, then that you ensure that it's still going to be something that you will use to then feed your inspiration, feed your drive to put out more things, and that you continue to give away and not just take. So yeah, it's a bit abstract, but as I said, like it might come in different forms for different people. Um, so the money is the more universal thing that obviously is quite tangible, and then the rest can be a bit more abstract. But I feel the one thing to be very careful about in any case is again the fact that the trick that most companies, most corporations will use is to put this really cool person in front of you who will make you feel that you're doing it for them, but you're not. So so yeah, so I feel like it's a case by case thing. But again, like so for example with the IP, the thing with IP, you might take 1 hour to put together to say do an illustration that's going to be used for the album cover of a band. Do you want to get that band is might be paid based on the amount of music they sell, not just a one-off fee. So if your artwork is becomes a very important part of the aesthetic of a certain band, and might very well be part of the reasons why people are attracted to it. So for example, you have definitely a lot of musicians that I can think of who have such a strong visual aesthetic that it can be argued that whoever whoever creates those visuals, well, really have a direct, should be remunerated, should be rewarded. Let's use the term rewarded just to avoid the monetary aspect, but should be rewarded in the same way that the musicians are. Like there's no reason there would be a difference there, because you could be, your 18-year-old creating music in a garage and just waiting, and then all of a sudden it blows up and you become a multimillionaire overnight pretty much. Well, what about the person who sold you a $50 illustration that becomes so iconic because it's the on the cover of your first important album? There's nothing that makes it impossible for things to be like this. But it is in the interest of the music industry, for example, to ensure that people who create visuals for them remain ignorant of that, because that's less money they have to share. And again, money is what, as an industry, not as an individual, not as an artist, but as an industry, the remuneration is the only part that is important to a corporation. So there is a true reason to never bring such things up to a visual artist who might be creating something for music. But even there is this famous story about the person who designed the swoosh logo for Nike, who I don't remember exactly what it is, but apparently was paid allegedly was paid like $200 for it. And is there a reason why this person is not still getting royalties for the use of it? Not really. It does sound like it would be very fair for that person to do that. But when you think of the conversation this person had with this rando like random guys and like creating shoes in their house in California. They were like, look, we have $50. Do you want it? And this person was like, oh, I'm just a young designer. Sure, give me $50 and I'll 200 and I'll do that logo. But the people who were doing the shoes, they knew, or that it could blow up, it could become this, and it did. The main difference is that the person who did the logo, she probably didn't know, and I'm pretty sure it was a woman. She didn't know that a logo, that any kind of design can very well be licensed in the very same way music is with shoes or products. Is a little bit different because the scaling is not really in terms of licensing, is because of production, but it works the same way. It's scalable. And as tattoo artists, that's the thing we don't have. It is not scalable. And that's what makes it beautiful, but also what does makes it so hard once you get to a certain age as a tattoo artist to keep the pace and stay relevant. And now I'm going to just also switch to like a side note on one thing that I find really heartbreaking about the tattoo industry, the way certain things are evolving, which is that they used to be, for all the things that were extremely questionable about the tattoo industry pre, I don't know, like up until the mid 2000s or late 2000s, um there was a certain way where OGs, like veterans of the industry, would be people that younger artists would go get a tattoo from, not really because they would be the best tattoo they've ever had sometimes, but mostly for the experience, for the stories, for the for this way to be part of the culture of groups of people and a lineage. And that was a certain way to show other people, hey, I got tattooed by this and that person. That probably says something about what I like and what I want to do as a tattooist, and the people I identify with. But that is very much disappearing. That is something that people do less and less. Like, people have this very, even very enthusiastic, very serious tattoo artists don't really go out of their way anymore to get tattooed by this person or that person. And it's a shame because we don't have books, we don't have all that written history that can stay. That was the way the stories and the knowledge and the history would continue to be trans passed down, transmitted, and shared in the community. And that is very much being something that is changing and that is being compromised. Um, so it's a little bit of a shame, uh, but I think it's very important. I think the need to bring back communication among tattooists is very, very important. And hopefully we have a sense today with also the shittification of social media in general, uh, that we can't rely on those. If we ever could, definitely not anymore. Like, we have to get back to actually talking to people and meeting up with people and generating, keeping this community alive.
Do you have the feeling that social media disconnected people?
Um, did it disconnect people? I'm not 100% sure if it disconnected people. Um, what it did is that it made people disinvest themselves from pre-existing, from quote unquote traditional structures like print media. That, as I was saying, they sort of like just organic, going to meet a person, gathering in person, conventions, things like this, guest spots, like, this kind of like circus that we had pre-social media. So I don't think social media disconnected people, or not up until recently. I think they're starting to do that now because of the way algorithms work and the way people are just constantly sent back to only people who are exactly like them, and that part. But what it did is that people disengaged themselves from the pre-existing structures, and then the new generations never invested themselves in those structures anyway. So the structures started crumbling and started disappearing. And now the social media themselves are starting to crumble and not do any of that. So we left with very little to stand on, in terms of community, in terms of ways to promote ourselves, to show the work. And it's interesting because that's something that's happening in a lot of other industries as well. It's happening in the music industry to some extent, even though it's much more robust. But it definitely happened in the watch industry, in the watch community that I know really well. All the pre-existing, the historical watch fairs started closing down. Nothing's really come up to replace those. The online media have pretty much, if not disappeared, but most of them have lost a lot of their visibility and quality as well. So that is happening across a lot of different industry. You definitely see that even in the art world. So I think there's a need to recreate media. It's beyond media, it's communities and it's structures of information, networks of informational networks that need to be recreated now post social media.
Mhm. Going back to the watches, um, what's the difference between your design process to design a watch and to design a tattoo?
So my design process is there's two phases to my design process. There's the inspiration process, if you will, and the design per se, then the formalizing. So design process would be inspiration and then formalization. The inspiration per se is a meta process. It's not related to a specific practice. It's not related to watches or tattooing or art or other kinds of designs or other things that I do, entrepreneurship or the inspiration, which is ultimately the reason why I do things that make me want to create, what I vibrate with, what makes me want to like emanate stuff. That is a constant. That's constant. That's any interaction I have, anything I see, any thought I have, and then I get back to those in a kind of cyclic way, in a sort of spiraling way, where like I keep revisiting ideas and impressions, concepts. And then what happens is that the formalizing part is specific to one type of activity. So designing watches, fonts, publishing, clothes, tattooing, of course. So when a specific context calls for the production or offers an opportunity to generate something, to produce something, then I will I will try to see which angle of that inspiration I have sort of fits best in this. So there's a sort of first kind of approach of being like, okay, well, like now I want to design, I don't know, I want to design a watch. There's all kinds of things I like. There's all kinds of things that to me belong to similar ideas. Like I can enjoy extremely futuristic, science fiction-esque uh design ideas. Um, but for me, I can read science fiction or read the Odyssey or read historical writing or read, I don't know, even mystical texts and or philosophy and still find very similar ideas, similar things that catch my attention and that I think are important. I can read like a science fiction book and find that there's all kinds of ways that some underlying ideas could apply to politics or whatever. So for me, there's that, and there's a lot of different things that might appeal to me, but often they sort of revolve around a small group of interests I have, but then they're already take a lot of different shapes in the things I see, from cinema to writing. So I know that similar kind of ideas can take a lot of different shapes to begin with in what I observe. Some, it could be very, in a very pragmatic, formal way. It can be very structured and abstract. It can be very futuristic looking. It could be very, vintage and organic. It can be, whatever. It can be if I don't know, if we're talking about designing a t-shirt, like, do I want it to look like a techno, like a t-shirt for a techno festival? Do I want it to look like, a painting from an old master? Do I want it to look like a black metal t-shirt, or like, the cover of a early 2000 rap album? For me, I can find common threads in all of those different artistic expressions, but then the expressions themselves might look extremely different. And when applied to my project, could lead to very different reactions. Because so first I need to see what kind of angle of my inspiration and the range of the things I like fits best for the specific context. And then when I've chosen that, I will work within what I know of the specific expression. So designing a watch, I'm like, well, okay, I do does abstract geometric designs apply in an interesting way to designing watches in the 21st century? The answer is yes. Um, is there a way I could apply my interest for old masters in painting to designing a watch today? Uh, Maybe, but probably not. I mean, that would be reaching a lot more. So I can definitely see how there's one segment of my inspiration that seems to just match much better to begin with. So that's the first part. And then I'll take that, I will evaluate my skills and my ability to produce that, and then I will apply it to my knowledge of the actual thing. And um, so that's for the sort of abstract part. So I do that with tattooing as well. I have a pretty wide range of things I can tattoo and subjects, and I still, for each person, for each client, will take a moment to decide which one I think is relevant to the piece in question. Uh, but nonetheless, I have the things I like to do best, the things where I can make a difference. There's certain things that I might like to look at or listen to or whatever, but I know I'm not the right person to produce this. It's not part of how I vibrate or what I emanate. Some people might be much better at creating like an anime looking tattoo or anime inspired watch. Like that might be, as much as I love it, it might not be what I'm the best for. So I will work within things that I have already identified are part of skills I have. And then I try to apply it to. And so what is interesting between watches and tattooing, there's actually quite a few similarities, much more than than designing clothes, for example. Because also the temporality, I don't even know if it's a word, the pace at which uh, um, tattooing or designing watches work, it is very similar. Clothes, you can buy a t-shirt, wear it for 3 months, and then, get rid of it, pass it on, whatever, and need a different t-shirt because your interests change or the trends change or whatever. Tattooing has that in common with watches, that it is something that is conceived and then worn and interacted with on a much longer time period. So by definition, we gravitate towards themes and aesthetics that are more time proof, that are more timeless, um, than what we would do for a t-shirt. So I would typically, that's why I sort of, that's what I always liked about geometry. Geometry is something that existed always in human history, and the question is that what it is applied to. But it's the most abstract. It's the visual manifestation of math. So it's really something that has almost always existed. in some ways. So so that's the reason why there's that kind of similarity. And then interestingly enough, it is something that has an that needs to work on the body, that has all the different the sort of 3D quality to it, and the need to be interesting from all kinds of different angles, the need to be just stay beautiful from different angles to make sense. And on top of that, with the watch, you have the fact that it is an object, so it needs to be, the ergonomics of it need to be good. So I think what is interesting with watches is that the constraints, the physical constraints, and the, yeah, well, material constraints, including financial, are much higher, because the costs to produce a watch are very high, and therefore you need to be safer with the risk you're taking to not to yeah, because the risks are pretty high with, or at least a different. Obviously, the risks with tattooing are high as well, but they happen on a different level. So I would say, in a lot of ways, it's quite similar. It's more similar than you would think. And then there's the 3D aspect of things, and the one thing that is extremely different is that tattooing is not something that could be given away or passed on, or whereas a watch can, like most objects can. And that's one aspect that I find quite interesting, because obviously tattoos are shared, because different people see it's shared in its visual enjoyment of tattooing. But if you design a specific design for tattooing, well, it can be reproduced to an extent for different people. I mean, there's enough one-trick ponies out there to definitely confirm that. But with watches, what I find interesting is to think, how can one shape, one form stay relevant, or have different forms of relevancy for different people through time and space. And that is quite different in a lot of ways. So, in terms of designing, I would say that up until the point where we have to materialize, like literally materialize the thing, it's very similar. And then it diverts quite drastically once you get into the material thing. But even if you look at my sketches, or either hand sketches or my Illustrator files for the tattoos I design, or for the washes, they're very similar, to the point that there's a lot of designs and shapes I created initially for tattoos that I created designs for watches with, or that I used as a base for the design of watches.
And you have one of them on your hand right now, on your wrist.
Yeah, yeah. That's the most recent one. There's a cool story about this one that I find that also is exemplifies a little bit what I was just saying. When it came out, and it initially came out in a titanium, and the people who did the 3D modeling for all of the marketing assets for the campaign when it came out, uh, posted on their profile on Instagram, um, posted a wireframe image of uh, of the watch, because it's how they had been modeling it in 3D and CGI to then create all the movies and the visual assets for. And it's still on my Instagram, by the way. And I posted it. It was beautiful. It's just like a black and white wireframe version of the watch. And people went crazy. People were like, which kind of material is that? And I was like, it's not a material. It's just a CGI wireframe version of the watch. But what I thought was so cool is that there was something so pure about it. I designed it as a shape, and all of a sudden, everything that was left was the shape. No materials, no polishing, nothing, just purely the shape. And it was represented there like this. But then the watches that came out were in metal and rubber. They looked very differently, up until the point where this one was released. It's all in sapphire, it's all transparent. And I posted it, and it looked exactly like that wireframe version I had posted a year prior, that looked like it could be transparent, sapphire, or whatever. And all of a sudden, really looked like it. And that's why I love this one so much, because it's the purest. Like in some ways, it's the purest form that my design can take. It's almost abstract. It's just the form itself with no flourishes, no nothing else. So I really particularly like this iteration here.
Tattooing is an organic process, whereas watch design involves precise engineering. How do you navigate these differences when transitioning between these fields?
Well, but again, I think it depends how you look at it. I think on the one hand, what not all watch design, but a lot of it is still handmade. It's handmade, or it can be handmade, but in order to look not handmade, do you know what I mean? Like it needs to be done the the highest level horological manufacturing is done with such a level of skillfulness that it's made to completely remove. It's handmade, but also nothing shows. Like it's so precise, it's so perfect that you're creating the illusion that, and it's this discrepancy between knowing that it's handmade, but the fact that it looks so abstract and perfect that it doesn't look handmade. And that's what very, very, like the highest level of craft in general brings, not all of them, but often transcends the human nature, the organic, like removes almost, like it looks like it's something that is not done by a human. Um, and with tattooing, it's kind of the same. Like ultimately, a lot of like what we what we aspire to is to be so pure in the expression of the idea. It can be very organic looking, of course, if that's the intention, but I feel that maybe the key is to go as far as possible in removing what comes between the intention and the expression of the intention. Do you know what I mean? Because whatever the intention is, it can be to look organic, or it can be to look not organic and geometric and mathematical and anything in between. But really, the human error happens between the intention and the expression of the intention and the result. And I feel that in both cases, the aim is to go as far as is possible to remove any accident, anything that compromises, everything that alters, that removes the result from the attention. You know what I mean? That makes it slightly different. In that sense, it's quite similar in what the intention is and what the process is. Obviously, the big difference is that there's no way to uh, with watches. There's all kinds of industrial processes that can and usually do happen um, on top of any sort of hand making, um, crafting that could be involved in producing a watch. Often there's almost no crafting anymore. Whereas with tattooing, for now and for the foreseeable future, there's no way to industrialize any part of it.
And where do you see the industry, like the watch industry, moving in terms of design trends?
Yeah, so the watch industry, the discussion about the watch industry, well, could be a whole podcast in itself as well. In short, the watch industry is facing similar challenges and crisis that the tattoo industry and a lot of other industries do. Design wise, where there's a similarity is like a direct similarity is that it's not really possible to say, oh, everyone's moving in one direction or another. It's becoming a complex, layered, like a complex flux of layers with micro trends. Some become bigger and have a trickle down into the whole culture. Some remain completely very, very confidential and disappear. Um, and at any given moment, you can get a tattoo looking like anything. Take any type of tattooing that has existed previously. you probably can find someone who still will be able to deliver a tattoo that looks like that. And with the watch industry, it's almost the same. You have, well, a narrower spectrum, but today you have people who collect and who buy and who make almost any kind of style of watch that has ever existed, pretty much. And and uh and they all have their little niche. Even sometimes it's purely like collecting, and with anything historical, anything vintage. um but it exists until someone is like, oh, let me create a new watch, like a new project inspired by that thing. So obviously, again, there's a bit of there's more things that need more stars that have to be aligned to actually produce a new watch. But I think today it is almost impossible in the watch industry to completely differentiate very active collecting with the production. Someone who someone who collects extremely actively a certain type of watch, and might become pivotal to recreating an interest for a certain type of vintage, like, niche of watches, might very well create a whole new market for secondary market watches in that specific style. Once those watches become available to buy, whether they're being designed today or whether they were designed 50 years ago, it doesn't matter that much. They are available for purchase. And then once that reaches a certain threshold, it becomes relevant to produce as well, like new versions of those. But often they, the innovation per se is or the amount of redesign, it's quite negligible. So I think there's definitely trends, and definitely what I find interesting is that there is a democratization. There is something, actually, do you know what, when I was talking about earlier, when I was talking about uh what I observed when I moved to London in the late 2000s in the world of tattooing, what motivated me to create Sang Bleu magazine, I'm observing exactly this in the watch world today. The the amount of people today who are interested in watches for for a myriad of different reasons is bigger than it's ever been. And it's very encouraging and interesting. But the same way, the tattoo industry was not really ready in the early 2000s to cater to those. The watch industry is not ready to cater to those. The watch industry today is still pretty much like the tattoo industry was in the early 2000s, like a group of people, some more interesting than others, some extremely talented, and some extremely boring, and uninspired, just continuously circulating the same things around, and completely ignoring and oblivious to the amount of interest that exists outside of that niche for that world, for the world of watches, and also to a large extent, which causes them to not cater to those and to ignore that kind of. So really, for me, the way things will be going is that, well, at least it's wishful thinking, but I'm really hoping I can help with that a little bit moving forward. But to progressively rethink the way we design watches and we sell watches with a more open approach to who the clientele might be, and to let ourselves as watch designers be more inspired by what the people truly want, and realize that a lot of things that might seem irrelevant to the average watch brand or watch designer actually could be worth considering. The same way when the Central St. Martin's students, fashion students, were going to the tattoo studios in London in the early 2000s and asking for, like, weird graphic or abstract, you know, tattoos that might have been inspired by Alexander McQueen or whatever. like no one was creating tattoos for those people. Like those people would have to go with their own design to get it tattooed by a grumpy, like, old school geezer there. Um, and then all of a sudden people were like, oh, let me talk to that person. Let me actually try to create tattoos that are relevant to those people because they exist and they bring all kinds of really interesting inspiration, really interesting ideas that can be truly inspiring as well. So I think that's in an ideal world, that's what's going to happen in the watch world in the coming decade.